When humanity first arrived at the Galactic Assembly, the galaxy barely noticed. Compared to the ancient empires that ruled the stars, Earth was young, inexperienced, and considered fragile. Their ships were sturdy but plain. Their diplomats were passionate but new to interstellar politics. Other species thought humans would scramble for favor, beg for protection, or quietly fade into the background like so many had before them. But the humans did something different. They stood before the assembly, not with demands or apologies, but with a simple declaration. Humanity would stand with the weak, protect the peaceful, and answer any call for help. It was not a boast or a threat. It was a promise, delivered with a certainty that made even the most jaded ambassadors pause. Their one rule echoed across the chambers, carried on every broadcast and recording. Do not harm those under humanity's protection. Some species laughed openly. The Rilfar emperors scoffed, calling it childish bravado. The Grithar Dominion chuckled darkly among themselves, already imagining how easily the humans' resolve would crumble when tested. Even the wise Solari elders, who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, whispered doubts. After all, promises were cheap among the stars. But there were those who listened. The smaller, quieter nations, the Elorians with their shimmering wings, the Velari with their soft, musical voices, the Torvins who lived in delicate glass cities, they heard something different in the humans' words. They heard sincerity. They heard a strength that did not come from fleets or weapons, but from a choice deeply rooted in the human spirit. The humans did not seek conquest or tribute. They offered friendship. They extended open hands where others clenched fists. They traded technology not for power, but for trust. They helped rebuild broken worlds, asked nothing in return but respect. And slowly, the alliances formed. The Elorians, nearly wiped out by centuries of raids, were among the first to accept humanity's offer. Earth sent engineers to fortify their settlements, doctors to heal their sick, and teachers to share knowledge. In return, the Elorians shared their music, their art, their wisdom born from generations of survival. Together, they built a future on hope, fragile but shining like a newborn star. Yet hope often draws jealousy. In the darker corners of the galaxy, old powers watched this new alliance with suspicion. To them, peace was weakness. Mercy was a vulnerability. They began to plot, convinced that humanity's promise was a bluff waiting to be called. What they did not understand, what they could not even imagine, was that humanity's oath was not made out of pride or ambition. It was born from their deepest truth. When humans chose to stand with someone, they did so completely. Betrayal was not an option. Abandonment was not in their nature. The humans had given one warning to the stars. And when that warning was tested, the galaxy would learn that Earth's promises were not made with words alone. They were made with the full, unstoppable force of the human heart. Velmora was a jewel among the stars, a world of sweeping silver forests and endless lakes that reflected the sky like polished mirrors. The Elorians had lived there in peace for generations, rebuilding what past wars had tried to take from them. When they signed a trade pact with Earth, it was a celebration unlike any Velmora had ever seen. Humans walked side by side with Elorians through the crystal markets, laughter filling the air. It should have been a new beginning. But in the dark spaces between the stars, the Grithar Dominion plotted. To them, the growing friendship between humanity and Velmora was a threat. They saw the strength in unity, the power of trust, and it terrified them. The Dominion thrived on fear, on broken promises, and shattered hopes. They believed if they struck fast enough, they could destroy the alliance before it truly solidified. One moonless night, the Grithar descended. Their ships blotted out Velmora's sky, raining fire down upon peaceful cities. Elorian homes, crafted over centuries, crumbled to dust. Families ran through the streets, clutching their young, their songs of peace silenced by the roar of engines. The Elorians had no armies. They had trusted in the promise of peace, in the strength of their new alliances. As the first cities fell, panic spread like wildfire. Ancient temples burned. Fields that once grew luminous flowers were turned to ash. In a hidden chamber beneath the capital, the elders gathered. Among them sat Elder Vera, the one who had first negotiated with humanity. Her hands trembled as she held the small device humans had given her, a beacon crafted not with technology alone, but with trust. It was meant for emergencies only, they had said. It would call for help across impossible distances. Are we sure? One elder whispered, fear and despair thick in his voice. Vera pressed the beacon's surface with steady fingers. A single pulse of blue light shot into the sky, unseen by Grithar eyes, but felt instantly by human outposts scattered across nearby sectors. The call had been made. The promise would be tested. Above Velmora, Grithar commanders gloated. They intercepted transmissions from panicked citizens begging for salvation. They laughed, certain that no help would come. To them, humans were just words and weak ships. They believed they had already won. They did not see the storm coming. From the distant edges of the galaxy, human fleets stirred. Engines ignited like falling stars. Orders spread through military channels in seconds, sharp and clear. Respond to the beacon. Protect Velmora. Fulfill the oath. The humans had warned the galaxy once. The Grithar, blinded by arrogance, had dared to test it. Now, they would learn. They would learn what it meant when humanity answered a call for help. They would learn what it meant to betray those under Earth's protection. They would learn the true meaning of fear, not from fire or conquest, but from the terrible, unstoppable arrival of humanity's wrath. The news from Velmora sent shockwaves across the galaxy, but it was in the grand hall of the Galactic Assembly that the full weight of the situation began to settle. The once bustling chamber, a place for diplomacy and trade, now held an air of tension so thick it was almost palpable. Alien representatives from every corner of the stars had gathered in their seats, exchanging nervous glances and hushed whispers. The attack on Velmora was bad enough, but worse, far worse, was the question that lingered over the room like a storm cloud. What would humanity do? Some species, including the long-established Terra Confederacy, immediately voiced their concerns. The Grithar are known for their ruthlessness, one of their representatives said, his voice dripping with calculated concern. If we act too hastily, we risk provoking a war that could consume us all. His tone was one of caution, a suggestion that humanity might overreact. The Solari, ancient and wise, nodded thoughtfully. The humans are impulsive, one of their elders murmured. They are quick to anger, and they might be too blinded by their emotions to think this through. They spoke with authority, as if the very idea of a human response could be easily predicted. The assembly seemed to agree. For the first time, the galactic leaders were starting to doubt humanity's promises. The whole room expected a traditional response. They expected diplomats to step in, to negotiate. They expected a plea for peace or sanctions. The idea that humanity would take immediate military action was dismissed as impossible, or, at best, reckless. And then she stood. Earth's ambassador, a woman of mid-years with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. Her name was Aria Solis, and she had been chosen for this moment because of one thing, her unyielding resolve. Unlike other diplomats, she didn't rely on flowery words or diplomacy. She understood that sometimes words weren't enough. As the room fell silent, Aria placed a single datapad onto the table in front of her. The screen flickered, showing a single image. Elorians in chains, helpless before the Grithar. She didn't need to speak at first. She let the image do the talking for her. "I've seen enough," she said simply. The words echoed in the chamber, cutting through the silence. The Grithar have broken the first and most important rule of the galaxy. They have harmed our allies. And for that, they will answer. The room froze. No one spoke. For the first time, the assembly realized that the humans were not bluffing. This wasn't a political maneuver, a move for power or prestige. This was an unshakable promise, a line drawn in the sand. The humans will not tolerate the harm of those under our protection, Arya continued, her voice low but firm. There will be no negotiations, no debate. The Grithar will be held accountable, and I suggest that the rest of you remember what that means the next time you consider testing our resolve. And with that, she turned and walked out of the assembly hall. No applause, no speeches, only the overwhelming weight of her words lingering in the air. The assembly was left in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like it. Humanity had not come to ask for permission or understanding. They had come to deliver a warning, one that would be heard by the entire galaxy. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as humanity's response began to unfold. The Grithar, already emboldened by their surprise attack on Velmora, did not know it yet, but their reign of terror was about to be shattered. Across the galaxy, the human fleet, vast, unyielding, and relentless, began to move. No one saw it coming. Within hours of Arya Solis's departure from the assembly, fleets of human warships powered up, their engines roaring to life with the sound of 1,000 storms. For once, the soft hum of diplomacy gave way to the cold, mechanical precision of war. But there was no grandeur in their approach, no display of might meant to intimidate. It was a quiet, methodical march, as though the humans were simply fulfilling an obligation they had made long ago. Command centers on Earth buzzed with activity, but it was not chaotic. The soldiers knew exactly what they were doing. The fleets had been prepared long before the attack on Velmora, not out of paranoia, but because humanity had made a vow. And when humans make a vow, they keep it. Hundreds of ships, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to sleek, fast destroyers, set course for the Grithar Dominion's outermost borders. Each ship was armed with the finest technology, but more importantly, each ship carried a message far more powerful than weapons. Humanity's word was their bond. They would protect their allies, no matter the cost. But it was not just warships that made the journey. On the front lines, specialized teams of engineers, diplomats, and medics were deployed alongside the soldiers, ready to rebuild what the Grithar had destroyed. The humans weren't just going to tear down empires. They were going to ensure that those who needed help would never have to face destruction again. And as the ships slipped into deep space, a signal was broadcasted across the galaxy. Simple and precise. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. To the Grithar Dominion, we are coming. The Grithar, at that moment, were too busy celebrating their supposed victory to understand the gravity of the situation. They had taken Velmora, captured its citizens, and slaughtered its protectors. To them, it was just another world to conquer, another step toward dominance. They couldn't possibly fathom that humanity would move so quickly, so decisively, to right the wrongs done to their friends. In their command centers, the Grithar laughed. They anticipated a long, drawn-out battle. But what they didn't realize was that humanity's response was not based on conquest or victory. It was based on something far more terrifying: duty. For humanity, the cause was clear. The safety of their allies was non-negotiable. It wasn't about power or territory. It was about keeping a promise, and they were going to make sure the Grithar paid dearly for breaking it. The Grithar had no idea what was about to hit them. Humanity was coming for them, and nothing would stop them. The Grithar were expecting a fight. They were expecting a traditional war, with heavy bombardment, drawn-out sieges, and endless waves of soldiers to overwhelm them. They believed the human fleets would come in force, demanding surrender or blood. Instead, they were met with something they could not have anticipated: a show of precision, a ruthless efficiency that seemed almost surgical in its execution. The first sign of humanity's arrival came as a strange stillness. The Grithar's outer defenses, massive stations meant to shield their empire from threats, suddenly flickered and died, one after another, without warning. Their communication networks went dark. Then came the bombs, not the conventional weapons they were used to, but perfectly aimed, disabling military bases and energy reactors with zero collateral damage. No civilians harmed, no cities destroyed. The Grithar commanders, desperate to respond, scrambled their fleets to meet the incoming human assault, but the humans had anticipated their every move. The Grithar were fast, but humanity was faster. Every missile that was fired by the Grithar was intercepted by precision countermeasures. Every ship that attempted to engage was disabled with calculated force, its engines torn apart before it could even reach firing range. But there was no carnage, no slaughter. The human forces did not fire a single unnecessary shot. They disabled, they captured, they neutralized. Where there were enemies, they left only prisoners. Where there was destruction, they immediately moved in their medical and engineering teams, ready to rebuild, to help, to ensure no Grithar forces could make a comeback. The Grithar soldiers on the ground, accustomed to overwhelming fear and destruction, could not comprehend the mercy behind humanity's wrath. They had never seen anything like it. Humanity could have obliterated them in an instant, could have wiped them from the stars with a wave of their hand. Instead, they treated their soldiers with an unexpected kind of honor. Those who surrendered were given medical care, housed in facilities, and even offered the chance to go home. "We will not be your executioners," the human commanders said in every broadcast. "We are here for justice. We will ensure you never harm another innocent soul." In the Grithar prison camps, where the remaining soldiers were detained, the full weight of humanity's presence began to sink in. The humans didn't seek retribution. They didn't seek vengeance. They sought balance, a return to peace. Even the Grithar leaders, those who had ordered the attack on Velmora, were treated not with hatred but with due process. They were held accountable for their actions, brought before the tribunal not as prisoners of war, but as criminals, their fates to be determined in an open and fair trial. The message was clear to the galaxy. Humanity was not like the other empires. They did not fight to conquer or to enslave. They fought to protect, to restore, and to ensure that the vulnerable were never left behind again. As the Grithar forces were gradually neutralized, the galaxy began to realize the terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't just a new power in the stars. They were something far more dangerous, an unyielding force of justice that would not be swayed by threats, fear, or intimidation. And for the Grithar, it was too late to back out of the consequences of their actions. They had violated the one rule that could not be broken. The Galactic Tribunal, established on neutral ground, was unlike any seen before in the history of the galaxy. No more grand speeches, no more political maneuvering. This was the cold, hard execution of justice, a place where right and wrong weren't blurred by power, but defined by the actions of those who dared break the sacred trust of the stars. The first Grithar leaders, those who had commanded the attack on Velmora, were brought in chains before the tribunal. The assembly was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, many of whom had watched the Grithar grow in power and feared their influence. They had, however, never expected that the humans would respond with such an overwhelming decisive force, not to punish, but to right a wrong. Humanity's approach to justice was not about revenge. It was about accountability. And no one, not even the Grithar, was exempt from it. The Grithar leaders stood in the dock, flanked by human guards. Their faces, once so confident and filled with arrogance, now betrayed uncertainty. The tribunal was not a place where they could rely on their power, their fear tactics, or their previous victories. This was a place where humanity's promise would be upheld, and their actions would speak louder than any propaganda. Area Solis, humanity's ambassador, stood at the head of the tribunal, unwavering. Her calm voice rang out across the chamber, steady and precise. "These beings," she began, her gaze unwavering, "took it upon themselves to violate the peace and trust we extended to the people of Velmora. They saw no value in honor, only in domination. They believed they could harm those under our protection without consequence." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. The tribunal watched in silence, captivated by the quiet fury in her eyes. "They underestimated humanity," she continued, "because unlike them, we do not see the weak as prey, the helpless as targets. We see them as equals, and when one of our own is threatened, we act, we protect, we defend." The Grithar leaders stood silent. They could not refute the charges. They had made their attack without provocation, seized a world, enslaved its people, and mocked the very principles of the Galactic Assembly. The evidence against them was irrefutable, and their guilt was beyond question. But the tribunal wasn't just about guilt. It was about what happened next. The galaxy watched, breathless, as Area Solis turned to the Grithar. "You will be held accountable for the pain you caused. But this trial will not be filled with bloodshed or retribution. We will not descend to your level." She motioned to the representatives of the galaxy. "The sentence will be decided by the people you wronged." And so, one by one, representatives from the Elorian delegation, the Torvins, the Velari, all the species who had been affected by the Grithar's actions, stepped forward. They spoke not of anger, but of justice. They spoke of what it meant to live in fear, to lose family, to see entire worlds turn to ash. And they made it clear, this was not just about punishment. This was about rebuilding, about giving the galaxy a chance to heal. The Grithar leaders were sentenced, not to death, but to years of forced labor, rebuilding what they had destroyed. They would help restore Velmora, and their crimes would be worked out through service, restitution, and an open, fair process of rehabilitation. For the galaxy, the message was clear. The strength of humanity wasn't in their power to destroy, but in their ability to forgive, to heal, and to restore balance when others would only burn. The sentence handed down by the tribunal wasn't just a victory for the Elorians or the other species who had suffered under the Grithar's reign. It was a triumph for a new vision of the galaxy, one where power didn't come from conquest or fear, but from understanding, from trust, and from the unyielding commitment to protect those who could not defend themselves. For humanity, it was the fulfillment of a promise, a vow that had echoed through the stars. And as the Grithar leaders began their forced labor to restore what they had destroyed, something unexpected began to happen. The galaxy began to change. The first ripple came from the smaller, weaker nations. They saw what humanity had done and recognized something they hadn't expected. The humans were not just allies. They were protectors. The weaker species no longer feared the larger, more powerful empires. They knew that humanity stood by them, that the humans would come when called, that they would honor the bonds of friendship and uphold their sacred promise. The fear that had gripped the galaxy for centuries slowly began to fade. One by one, worlds that had long lived in the shadow of larger powers began to open their doors to humanity. Trade pacts, research collaborations, and cultural exchanges began to flourish. The once fractured, divided galaxy began to unite in ways no one thought possible. They had all seen what it meant when humanity gave its word. The Elorians, who had once been on the brink of extinction, now stood as proud members of this new galactic order. They had been given more than just protection. Humanity had given them hope. In the aftermath of the destruction, they worked alongside humans to rebuild, to replant the forests that had burned, to heal the people who had suffered. But the greatest gift humanity had given them wasn't in the form of material wealth or technology. It was the gift of standing tall once more, knowing they would never face destruction alone again. Even the Grithar, once the most feared of empires, found themselves swept up in the tide of change. Under the human watch, their punishment had been harsh but fair. They had been forced to rebuild the worlds they had destroyed, and in doing so, they had learned what it meant to serve, to work for something greater than themselves. They were not treated as enemies. They were treated as people capable of redemption. And slowly, they began to change. The galaxy had seen the consequences of betrayal, but they had also seen the incredible power of mercy. They had witnessed the strength of a promise made and kept. no matter the cost. Humanity's actions had proven that justice didn't have to come at the cost of destruction. It could be something that healed, something that united. As the human fleets continued to patrol the borders, ensuring the peace they had fought so hard for remained intact, the galaxy knew one thing for certain. Humanity had changed the way the stars would shine forever. The stars had begun to shift, subtly, but undeniably. The galaxy, once divided and rife with distrust, now pulsed with a different energy, one of hope, unity, and shared purpose. Humanity's actions had rippled through the fabric of galactic diplomacy, changing it forever. What had once been seen as a mere military force, driven by power, had evolved into something much greater, a symbol of unwavering justice, compassion, and resolve. It didn't take long for the effects of humanity's oath to become clear. Planet after planet, species after species, began to adopt the same ideals. They saw the example set by humanity and realized that the galaxy didn't have to be ruled by the law of the strongest, nor by the cold calculations of conquest. It could be ruled by a collective will to protect, to restore, and to honor those who needed it most. Humanity, in turn, became the beating heart of this new alliance. Area Solis, the face of humanity's resolve, was hailed as a hero, but it was never about her. It was about the promise that every human, no matter where they came from, stood behind. It was about the commitment made to Velmora, to the galaxy, and to every species that had ever been wronged. And this promise spread like wildfire. In the wake of the Grithar's defeat, former adversaries found common ground, seeking to strengthen the bonds that humanity had helped forge. Trade agreements flourished, but so did cultural exchanges. The arts, music, and traditions of distant worlds intertwined with human creativity, creating a shared galaxy that celebrated differences rather than fearing them. They saw that strength wasn't just about power, it was about unity, about finding the beauty in each other's stories, and standing together against tyranny. The Elorians, once brought to the brink of extinction, now flourished in this new era. Their landscapes, ravaged by the Grithar, were restored. Their people, traumatized by years of war and destruction, began to heal, supported by humanity's unwavering presence. Velmora's crystal waters once again shimmered beneath alien skies, and its people, who had once feared for their survival, now knew a future full of possibilities. And even the Grithar, forced into a humbling path of rehabilitation, found a new purpose. Under the watchful eyes of the humans, they worked side by side with those they had wronged, rebuilding the very worlds they had razed. They learned the value of compassion, of restitution. The Grithar were not an evil force to be obliterated. They were a species that had been given the chance to change, to redeem themselves, in the eyes of the galaxy. But humanity's legacy wasn't just in what they had done. It was in what they had inspired. Other species began to follow their example, crafting alliances that were based on shared values rather than fear or greed. The lessons learned from Velmora became the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation, where peace was a choice, not an afterthought. As humanity continued to move forward, their ships carrying not just weapons, but the promise of a brighter future, the galaxy knew that the oath made to Velmora would forever echo through the stars. The legacy of humanity's oath had not only shaped a new era, it had created a galaxy where all life was valued, protected, and honored.